Democracy in America is in crisis. Distrust of government is on the rise while voter turnout continues to fall. The increasingly professional nature of politics leaves many people feeling bewildered, cynical, and distanced from the levers of power. Corporate America, meanwhile, wields unprecedented influence and routinely sets political agendas. The retreat by average citizens from public affairs is matched only by the widening gap between rich and poor. But because opportunities to gain political skills and knowledge correlate largely to economic status, those in greatest need of political power remain the least likely to obtain it. The resulting outlook for many urban communities is grim. One such urban community is Los Angeles. LA's rise to prominence has been described as a marvel of urban growth. But behind the image of an economically robust and culturally vibrant world-class center lies the sobering reality of a city that is the embodiment of social isolation and disconnection.
Previous to coming to Los Angeles, I was organizing in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. And I had been here about a month when a friend called and said, "You must be so glad to be out of the isolation of, a little border town." And it struck me. I looked around and I thought about being here a month, and I told her, actually, I think I've never been in a more isolated place in my life among 10 million people. It seems like the epitome of the good life in Los Angeles is to be left alone, to be totally isolated, to be disconnected, not to be obligated, not to be encumbered.
Author William Fulton describes in The Reluctant Metropolis that the seeds of isolation were sown early in LA's development. Whereas nearly every other city in the world has grown from a single center, Los Angeles simply appeared when many different centers blurred together. LA, consequently, is notoriously disconnected and distinctly suburban, a fragmented metropolis, largely bereft of memory of its urban core.
Los Angeles has been remarkably effective in dividing people, making people feel like that one neighborhood does not connect to another, and that limits their effectiveness, both personally, socially, and politically.
Fulton concludes, there is a void at the center of Los Angeles, not just a void in the physical center where neglect has created slums, but a void in the political and psychological center where Angelenos decline to take responsibility for a metropolis and an urban landscape that we ought to think is ours. But there is a different story to tell. On July 11, 2004, over 12,000 delegates, representing 125 congregations, schools, unions, and nonprofits throughout Los Angeles County, convened at the Los Angeles Convention Center in a historic attempt to address directly the isolation of LA's communities. They gathered to found an institution called One LA, a county-wide, nonpartisan political organization intent on long-term social change.
The mission of One LA is to bring together institutions who want to develop their own leadership and build power so that they can build standing for families in their community.
Unfortunately, we have a lot of institutions whose fundamental role is to teach us what psychologists call learned helplessness. They teach incompetence. They teach the lack of capacity.
One LA's member institutions share a desire to be institutions that are engaged in the formation of democratic citizens in the fullest sense, active participants in the public decision-making process, and agents in the creation of a more just society. To help grasp the significance of the founding of One LA, it is necessary to turn to its origins. One LA is an affiliate of the Industrial Areas Foundation, an organization founded more than 50 years ago by the late Saul Alinsky. Described as the father of community organizing, Alinsky's pioneering methods enabled poor and disenfranchised communities to develop and exert political power in order to bring about desperately needed changes. The IAF's presence was felt in California in 1976, with the founding of the United Neighborhoods Organization in East Los Angeles. Leading the work this time was a young organizer from Texas by the name of Ernesto Cortez Jr. Whereas Alinsky had sought to build unilateral power, or power over others, the strategy Cortez brought to LA in the mid-1970s focused on building relational power, the ability to create change through collaboration with a wide range of constituencies. The success of the United Neighborhood Organization, or UNO, led to similar organizations being built in South Central, the San Gabriel Valley, and the East Valley. By the 90s, however, the IAF's approach of having 4 distinct organizations in Los Angeles began showing signs of weakness.
We had organizations in East LA and South Central, San Fernando Valley, and the East Valley, and trying to begin one on the West Side. And we didn't have enough critical mass in any of the organizations to do what we needed to do.
It became clear that those sort of geographically fixed areas were not representative of the whole of the metropolitan area. By that time, LA was way more diverse, and the populations had shifted so dramatically.
Neighborhoods which would have been African American moved in 10 years from African American to Latino, from Latino to Korean.
10 million people, 88 different cities, home to 3 million people without insurance alone, required a new way of thinking about organizing.
LA's new realities led to a landmark decision. The separate IAF organizations would be reorganized into one county-wide organizing effort. Thus, the LA Metropolitan Strategy, the organization that would oversee the rebuilding process, was born.
We officially started the reorganizing in 1999. Ernie would talk about 3 to 5 years to rebuild this thing, and telling our allies, don't expect us to be fully formed and really engaged in action for that period of time.
Organizing is nothing more than a fancy word for building relationships. Relationships of what we call a public nature. So what organizing is all about is going outside of our comfort zone, going outside of that which we are familiar with, and crossing race and crossing ethnicity and class and geography, and beginning to mix with people who are different than we are.
That has been one of the major shifts for me, is to understand that there is the way that power comes for community is through relationships, relating and connecting and knowing and being in relationship with each other.
One LA trainers begin by encouraging communities to focus on building relationships with each other as a foundation for public action.
So let's look at kind of a graphic image of what this culture looks like. So we have the students complaining about the parents. We have the parents complaining about the teacher. We have the administration complaining about the central office. This is the culture of bureaucracy.
This has been a struggle for teachers, for parents, for administrators to come to a type of agreement. There just hasn't been the conversations that need to happen. The struggle is in trying to really affect change in our schools.
How is this going to begin to change? This is going to begin to change when students begin having different kinds of conversations with their parents. When teachers have different kinds of conversations with their principals and assistant principals. And this thing has to be a network of relationships. We need to change this into a relational culture.
The heart and soul of organizing is the individual meeting, where organizers and leaders cultivate this art of conversation, public conversation, about the stories that have shaped us, about our anger and what moves us, about our interests, and conversations that help us to determine if we have a personal foundation for a public relationship.
I remember when I first got involved, I was thinking that, well, of course, we'll always have time for an appointment. But little did I know when they came that this weren't just, chit-chatting, or this weren't just about what your church is doing. They came to know who I was. They wanted to know my story. They wanted to know, what is it that makes me tick?
Numerous individual meetings lead to the next step in the organizing process. Small gatherings known as house meetings, where stories are shared and common ground is built.
You do a massive number of one-on-ones which then lead to these small group meetings. In some communities, we don't call them house meetings, but it's basically 8, 10, 12 people. We like to keep it no more than 12. We want everybody in the meeting to talk. And house meetings have got 3 purposes. One is to build the relationships with people. 2 is begin to identify what are some of the issues. And then 3, to mobilize their energy and their focus around the particular issue that they deal with. So house meetings ought to lead to research actions. House meetings ought to lead to local actions.
The purpose of building relational power is ultimately to put that power to work in the public arena. Carefully orchestrated actions are one way that clusters of institutions go public by putting their growing solidarity and power on display.
A successful action is essentially public drama. It's a way in which people begin to engage with someone who's got power to share their power. It's not zero sum, it's we create more power. It's teaching people how to be effective actors on the stage of public life.
And then I went to First Presbyterian Church of Pomona, and they said, we're a small church, but God is big. Yeah! And when LA Metro came along and taught us how to run house meetings, we said amen. And when they taught us how to encourage people to share their stories, to build the power of relationships, we said amen. And here today, when we stand together with other churches, we are not powerless. Amen.
If we're not constantly coming back to broad-based building of institutions' capacity to engage in real action that gets a reaction from their own folks, from public officials, from the press, then we're not doing our job.
So the question we ask ourselves really is, are we ready? Are we ready? In 30 days, we will be getting on buses, riding together to the convention center with our brothers and sisters from across Pomona. We will tell our stories of pain and loss and share our hopes and dreams. Together, we will challenge the official history of this area, and together, we will create a new future for this community. Pomona, let's be history makers together.
The membership role of 1LA consists of institutions rather than individuals. While participation by schools, unions, and other community organizations is growing, religious congregations provide the backbone of 1LA's institutional base.
The work of organizing is very attractive to communities of faith. It appeals to basic values which are embedded in those traditions. The tradition of the dignity of the person, the importance of the community being constructed in such a way that people are cared for and cared about, and there is attention being given to those at the margins, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, that we have a responsibility as we organize society to bring people from the margins into the center.
In a place like Los Angeles, where there's such diversity, and yet such isolations, there's a way for the church to be a kind of mediating institution. What would church be like when they are in a context where they're connected with the community and are interested and committed to changing the community that they're in?
A central goal of 1LA is to help congregations become not only sites of refuge, but places where power is developed and exercised in order to transform society. The process frequently begins by reflecting on the historical traditions upon which people of faith commonly draw.
So Jacob is making this pottage of lentils, and Esau comes across it and says, "My brother Jacob, feed me or I'm starving, I'll die." And Jacob says, "Of course you can count on me, my brother. Of course I'll feed you. But what do I get for it?" And Esau says, "Well, what do you want?" Jacob says to Esau, "Sell me your birthright." And Esau says, "What good is my birthright? It's not going to feed me. It's not going to keep me warm at night. Of course I'll sell you my birthright." Now Walden argues that you and I, all of us, we are Esau. We have sold our birthright for the goods and services of a mass consumption society, for material goods. And he argues that our birthright, our inheritance, is our politicalness, the Great Awakening and the American Revolution. It's also a story of the abolitionist movement, the women's movement, the civil rights movement.
One LA leaders and organizers spend untold hours exchanging stories, building relationships, researching issues, and engaging in strategic public action. Results of this work can be measured in tangible community improvements, such as more affordable homes, increased wages, and improved schools. Results can also be measured in significant individual and institutional transformations.
At the center of organizing is the transformation of the individual person. Organizers, their transformation and the development and transformation of leaders.
Part of what this work has meant for me as an African American woman is really reclaiming my birthright. Discovering that as an African American growing up in Wichita, Kansas, felt as if, although I was born in this country, didn't have the same rights and opportunities as white folks. And have begun to see that part of it is that I have to reclaim what it means for me to be an American. And that this work has helped me clarify that and take ownership of that.
If we are doing our work well as organizers and paying attention to the interests of our institutions, then we are clearly helping people's leadership skills and insights and capacities emerge on behalf of their institutions as well as on behalf of this wider community agenda and interest.
Zita Davis is a leader, and she was actually one of the first people that I met when I came to LA about 2.5 years ago. And in that meeting, her husband did all the talking. And just began a process of conversation with her and trying to find out what her appetite was. What kind of leader does she want to be in her church, in her school, and in the city. She was a co-chair of one of the first actions and has really taken ownership for this organization.
I've grown spiritually, personally, professionally, based on the work I've done with LA Metro. They spend an awful lot of time teaching us how to understand our needs and then how to work to solve those problems or resolve those issues. At any of the meetings I have with my councilmen or any of my city officials or government officials, I'm at the table or other leaders are at the table. We are asking the questions, we are doing the follow-up, we are doing the work.
Tonight we're having very significant action here in the San Fernando Valley. One of the co-chairs is a principal of a local elementary school. This is a school that's within a few feet of 31 landfills.
I had been transferred to Fernangeles. Everyone was talking about the detriment to Sun Valley and the health and the welfare of everything seemed to be the dump.
In 2 years of working with her, she has gone from a principal who was very reluctant to even step out of her office to a principal who tonight is co-chairing an action. Because of her anger, she has worked to recruit other institutions and build the kind of power that's necessary to take on this multinational corporation.
We want kids to prosper, and the only way to improve API, to improve the quality of what's happening in our community, is to work together on that. And the dump is the focus of that right now.
Karen is a perfect example of how someone is willing to re-examine their own stereotypes of themselves and their role, and really take on the role of becoming a master teacher, a developer of other leaders. Frankly, the best of an educator.
How many of you have been to the walkthrough yet? How many of you gone down to the convention center? How's it look? Huge. Real big, right? I challenge you to go down and look at that room and really see what it takes to fill that room.
We are kind of excited because we're going to have this kind of historic, event, right. But at the same time we're kind of anxious. Right. How are we going to fill out 10,000 people here?
We have inside the videos 1,100 people sign up already. We expect to get more and more.
Hi, I'm Natalie from Mary Magdalene Church. So far we have 300 people signed up. Tomorrow we are having a huge sign up from the pews. We are expecting 400 more people to sign up.
5 years of careful reorganization through the LA Metropolitan Strategy finally culminated in One LA's founding convention in July of 2004.
Of the United States of America.
One LA's founding convention on July 11th was about ownership. It was in many ways a chaotic day, a very exciting day, a very successful day, but the primary success of it, aside from delivering all the public officials, aside from just busting our turnout, we had over 12,000 people there, it was the ownership on stage and on the floor of the leaders who'd been working for 5 years to build this organization. It was clear this was their organization.
For organizers, it is following a public action that the real work begins. In this, One LA's founding convention was not an exception.
The importance of a founding event is you go back and teach recognition and power and ownership. Since the founding, there's been a lot of local actions, small things, but significant things. The school district had a policy which required parents to show their driver's license in order to be volunteers in the school district. So we had an action and changed that policy.
In South Central, leaders were challenged off that action to go in and recruit more institutions. Leaders in the Mid-City, off the anger about the stories of evictions in the Mid-City, worked with local city officials and won for the first time an eviction prevention plan from the city of Los Angeles. The action's in the reaction. If the reaction hadn't been to go back into institutions and do further actions, then July 11th would have just been a very expensive, very complicated, and time-consuming event.
By building a new grassroots political organization, through relationship building and public action, One LA is creating vital public space in which Angelenos can learn to operate in a new way, and politics can be reclaimed as the activity of ordinary citizens.
People have to see and envision the possibilities, so that event was very important. But you also see where you're not. Given the scope of this work with Los Angeles and its challenges and all of the diversity and all of the distance and all of the complexity, we're still rebuilding, or we're still recruiting, we're still creating the base.
Because LA is the world capital of immigrants and of transitional communities that are here, if it can be done here, it can be done anywhere. That to be able to really build a collective of churches and synagogues and schools and unions and nonprofits who make a claim together on some turf and make a claim about wanting to build some power to change and rebuild their communities is radical and can be a model for other large and complex metropolitan areas in the country.
Political change requires the exercise of power, and the way this power is generated is critical. By creating space in which people tell their personal stories and build on issues of common concern, One LA is overcoming the alienation and isolation that characterizes much of urban life, while creating a powerful organization for the journey ahead.